Trying to understand English grammar is like trying to solve a mystery. English grammar is irregular, contradictory, and confusing. Fortunately, though, you don't have to walk these dark streets of grammatical confusion by yourself. I'm English teacher Paul Duke, and on this show I'll be your grammar detective. Each week, we'll investigate communication crimes and suspicious sentences, context clues and example evidence. Together, we'll solve these English mysteries once and for all. Welcome to Hard-Boiled English Live. Good evening, Grammar Gumshoes, and welcome to Hard-Boiled English Live for another Friday. Today is October 20th, 2023, and I'm thrilled to be here with you. I am your humble host, English instructor and grammar detective Paul Duke. And on this show, I investigate your grammar mysteries. And tonight I have a special guest that I'll bring on shortly, and we're going to explore a very specific English grammar mystery, which is the mystery of prepositions. Now, I'm streaming to you live from Vancouver, Canada, to YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Twitch, and Live Space, a gaming and live streaming platform. So whichever platform you're watching on, whichever country you're in, welcome to my weekly live stream. Now, to get things started, I'd love to hear from you. So say hello in the comment thread and tell us what country you're watching from. And I see already we have some friends with us. We have Stacy. Welcome, Stacy. We also have Lolly Lolly from France. Welcome. Who else is here? We have Caroline with us. Where are you from, Caroline? Or Caroline? However you prefer to pronounce it. From Kenya. Okay, great. Wonderful. We have Shakur Adil from Morocco. Welcome, Shakur. Great to have you with us. Yes, great. Let's pop over here and see who shows up. Yes, a lot of people ask me and my guest questions about prepositions. They are little words, but they have a lot of meaning and pose a lot of problems for learners. So tonight we're going to investigate those and look at them a little more closely. I'm just going to adjust something here on my camera. We also have a Facebook user. Oops, right here. Where am I? Yes, Facebook user is inside a Facebook group, so we don't see your name with if you're in a Facebook group. You're watching from Mexico on Facebook. Okay, great. We have Kyle from Brazil. Welcome. We have live stream from Seattle, Rainer Avenue. Okay, and I think your name is Diagana. Am I saying that correctly? Diagana. Who else is with us? Who is joining us just now? Wherever you are. Actually, today we're starting 30 minutes early because we want to devote 2 hours to this live stream and take our time going through the prepositions that pose the most trouble for people. So we've started a little bit early, so I think a lot of our viewers will join at 4 p.m., which is our usual time. So, is anyone else watching? We have Mohammed, yes, from living in the Seattle area. So actually, Where am I again? Mohammed. Gosh, this is crazy. Mohammed is actually very close to me because Seattle is on the west coast of the US and Vancouver is on the west coast of Canada, and it's about 2-3 hours drive distance, very close. Seattle is the closest city to Vancouver. Lolly Lolly says, prepositions are my nightmare. They are a nightmare for a lot of people. Hopefully tonight, after our discussion, you'll understand them a little bit better and maybe be able to use them with a little more confidence. That's our goal. We also have joining us, yes, Angel Omar Ramirez Garcia from Mexico. Welcome. Love the flag here. Beautiful flag. Yes, Angel, today we're talking about prepositions, which in my experience, a lot of my Mexican students have a hard time with them. So I hope they help you. Well, I guess we should get right down to business, guys. So I'd like to introduce you to my guest. Let me just clear the captions. And we can get started talking about our favorite mystery, prepositions. Okay, let me just get ready here. Okay, so I want to introduce you to my guest. My guest is an English instructor. He operates inside Brazil, and he's in fact a Brazilian. Now that might surprise you, but in my experience, some of the best English teachers in the world are not native English speakers from Canada or the UK or the US. Some of the best teachers I've met are actually themselves English learners who study the language so closely they become experts at it. My guest tonight is one of those kind of teachers. I've been very impressed with his English teaching knowledge and skill since I met him, I guess about a year ago. So tonight we are very honored to have him with us, and he's going to share some of his perspective on the experience of both learning prepositions and teaching them. And what's interesting is, in my experience, Brazilian students have a lot of advantage in learning English because we share a lot of the Latin root words. On the other hand, they also have a huge struggle mastering the English prepositions instead of the Portuguese, Brazilian prepositions. So he's going to explain some of those things to us once he comes on. So when I have guests on the show, I like to put it into the sort of hard-boiled detective theme. So I call this segment Witness Interrogation. So we're going to bring our witness on very shortly, and we'll meet him. So without further ado, let me introduce you our special guest today. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Pedro Said to the show. Hi, Pedro.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Paul, thanks for having me here tonight. Well, for me, it's
Thank you
tonight,
for
right?
joining me. Yes, I guess it is night. For me, it's approaching the evening, but we're not there yet. It's still late afternoon. Thank you for joining the show, Pedro. It's great to have you. And this is your second time, right?
This is my second time. Yes, it's true. I don't remember if in my last time I had my short hair or long hair. Don't remember. Probably long.
Long or short, probably more than I have.
Fair enough.
Of that, we can
Hello,
be sure.
Lolly. Fair enough.
So we have some guests saying hello to you. Very kind, very nice. We have lovely guests always.
Hello.
Lovely viewers, I mean. And as you may have noticed earlier, they're all over the world. We have Mexico, we have
Oh, yes.
France, we have Brazil, we have Morocco, Kenya. Stacy, I believe, is in Korea.
Hello, everyone.
It's great. So, Pedro, why don't you tell us, first of all, many people don't know you. So let me ask you a little bit about your background. Can you tell us briefly about your growing up experience when you started learning English, how you decided to become an English teacher. Tell us a little bit about your life and who you are
Of
and your
course,
hobbies.
of course, of course. But first, please, everyone, can everyone listen to me well? Please let me know, because if I have any connection problems, I'll just change. So please let me know on the
Yep.
chat. I'll be checking. Paul,
So
is
far, it
everything
sounds
okay with
great.
you?
Yeah, sounds great. Picture's great.
Okay, excellent. Well, I'm Pedro Said. I've been teaching English for almost 7 years now. Um, I am 22 years old. I've been teaching English since I was 16. And well, it's very funny because I got interested into English because of video games. I Poe knows that I play a lot of video games, and this got me into English. And in from in these years, actually, I've worked at schools. I've worked with business English, so it's been great, actually. And my personal Paul also asked me about my personal experience with English. In my case, I've always loved English, and I think when you love something or studying something, things tend to get a little easier. I would say it's less complicated when you like to do something. So, but it was still very challenging. And actually, prepositions they were terrible for me in in a period of my life. So, which is very interesting because it's difficult for many people in different parts of the world, right? And well, post also asked me about my hobbies. Is that correct?
Sure.
One of them, playing video games, and I love reading comic books, which help me improve my English.
Yeah,
Watching movies, watching series. It's interesting because when we are studying English, people are very shy. Students are very shy, so
that's
they
right.
don't tend to speak English a lot in the classroom, especially when you speak the same language. So for me, to my experience, watching movies, watching series, listening to music was probably the only contact to the language that I had. So I can assure you that if you don't have the habit of watching and reading, now's the time. And I can assure you that it will help you, and it's going to help you.
It's interesting too. You mentioned comics. A lot of learners that I meet tell me they don't like reading because they think reading has to involve really heavy duty old British literature or something. But it doesn't. It just has to involve English to get the
Yep,
benefit of it. And comic books have good English to absorb.
it's true.
Another thing I wanted to add in terms of your interests and hobbies, I think you and I share a passion for something. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but
Oh, yes.
we both love rabbits.
It's true. Wait, they are right here. I can get one of them. So, ah,
Pedro
here's one
also
of them.
has rabbits.
Yeah,
See, your
there we
rabbits are
go.
real. Mine are
Mine
not
are real.
quite. Adorable.
Yeah, they are.
In addition to being English teachers, we are rabbit lovers.
Oh, yes.
I live in a small apartment, so I don't keep a rabbit with me, but in my neighborhood, I have parks, and often when I go for a walk, I see wild rabbits running around. So I get my daily dose of cute rabbit when I go for a walk. So, Pedro, let me ask you something. When was the first time you decided to become an English teacher? What was the moment where you said, I'm pretty good at English. Maybe I can help others learn?
Well, I can see that it wasn't me who said that exact phrase. I used to study English at a school here in Brazil, right? And s- like we often had these type of presentations where we would choose the topic and talk about it. But in one specific class, the teacher had another idea in mind. He told us to choose in English a grammar topic to present and prepare a small class about it, right? A short class about it. And mine was the simple past. And then when I finished explaining, there were three teachers in the room with me. And then by the end of my presentation, one teacher just, well, he joked, Pedro, you're great. Why don't you teach? But I thought he was joking, but he wasn't. And then I started considering, like, interesting. This was my, it was my last year in the English course, so I was about to finish. And then well, I thought of giving it a go, you know? So that was when the brother of a friend wanted to have English classes, and he came to me. I said, well, now's the time to try. So I charged a very small price at that time, and I kind of found myself.
That's
So
great.
that was when I, 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 s- I thought, well, I can really do this. I think I can really do this, and it feels good. So I just jumped in.
Jumped in. That's great. That's a good lesson for everyone. When you have an opportunity and an interest, just try it. Just get in there and do it. Right? A lot of things we are because we do them, not because we have a certificate that tells us we are that thing, because that doesn't mean anything if you're not doing it. You have to do something to be it, right?
Exactly.
We have a question here for you from Lolly Lolly in France. Do you know Rod, the English teacher? He's Brazilian.
I don't think I do. Is he famous in social media? Because that's a problem because I don't know many social media teachers, and that's very funny. I don't know why, but I just don't. So I don't think I know him. Probably I just I've seen some ad about him, but I don't think
Yeah,
I know him.
if he's a YouTube teacher or a TikTok teacher, I'm not familiar with Rod, the English teacher. Hopefully, you've learned a lot from Rod.
Oh yeah.
In my experience, I don't know about you, Pedro, but on social media, I've seen a lot of really good English teachers offering good educational content. I've also seen some bad ones that offer content that's, even if it's entertaining, it may not be all that educationally valuable, let's put it that way, or useful. Here's
Thank
an
you, Stacy.
observation. Stacy, yes, you became an English teacher when you were a teenager. It's surprising. Yeah,
Thank
you were
you.
young, right?
Yeah, I was 16 when I first started teaching.
And
Oh, this is water. But it's just a yellow bottle, but that's water.
that's funny. Yeah, what's interesting too about your age is that it also indicates how important English is to Brazilians, right?
Yeah.
It's so important that they'll give a chance to a teenager who has something to offer. It seems like some cultures, some societies wouldn't give a teenager a chance, no matter how skilled they were. But it also tells us there's something very important that
Oh,
you
yes.
provided for Brazil, right?
Exactly. Well, at least I hope so.
Yeah, certainly. Anyone else have a question for Pedro before we get into our topic? Lolly lolly, lolly lolly. What are your rabbits' names, your bunnies' names?
Well, in Portuguese is Vandinha and Morticia, but they are based on the Adams family. So one would be Vandinha would be Wednesday, and Morticia is Tish. Morticia is the same. So
Wednesday
yes,
was the daughter, and Morticia is the mother, right?
yes. But in their case, they are sisters. However, they have a little like I mixed personalities because Wednesday, let's pick like in English, when I'm talking about my rabbits, should be Morticia, and Morticia should be Wednesday because of their behavior.
Okay, here's a question.
About Brazilian festival, hmm. But it depends. Are we talking about Carnival?
Probably that's the most internationally known festival, but you have many festivals, right?
Well, I have to be honest here, Paul. Some people might say that I am a fake Brazilian because I am a Brazilian who doesn't like soccer. I don't watch. Hello, Caio. Oh, he's my student. So I am not into soccer. I went to Carnival once, but I was like, it was in the middle of the street. It was like, too many people. I'm going home. But in general, it is great. You can have a lot of fun, and it's a very happy festival. So if you're into parties and like public excitement, then Carnival is just for you.
I think I know what you mean. I'm a fake Canadian. I think when people think of Canadians, they think of they love snow, they love hockey, the sport hockey. Maybe they think Canadians love Justin Bieber or Celine Dion. What else do you think about Canadians?
So
In
I
my
think of
case, I
Ryan
hate
Reynolds.
snow. Yeah, I hate snow. I hate hockey. I never listen to Justin Bieber or Celine Dion. I think they're horrible. So I'm a very bad Canadian.
Fair enough.
We're
I
artificial citizens of our countries. We're phonies.
Yes, we are. We're phonies.
Or maybe we're just interested in things that our countries don't offer.
That's for sure.
One of the things that I think a lot of Canadians experience, Canada's a very young country and it's a multicultural country. So we haven't had thousands of years of history to develop a culture like some places.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of Canadians grow up wanting a deeper culture. So a lot of Canadians either move abroad or study abroad or are very interested in other cultures that are more rich and long histories. In my case, from a very young age, I was very interested in Asian culture, specifically Japanese culture. And it's a fascinating place and culture to me because it's so old and rich compared to Canada, which is basically 100 years old. There's no culture here except the culture that our immigrants bring here.
Hmm.
So, is there a country or a culture that you're particularly interested in outside of Brazil?
Sorry? I'm sorry. It
Is
was
there, it's okay, is there another culture outside of Brazil that you're interested in?
well, there is actually. I am well. It's very funny, but I like the Norse, or some people call it Nordic culture,
Yeah,
because I'm really into, for example, mythology,
right.
and I really like
Vikings and things like that.
the Viking mythology. Well, you can see because of my beard,
You're a
but
Viking at heart.
I'm a Viking at heart. But well, jokes aside, I really like the Japanese culture as well. Um, their traditions and all. I think they can be a little bit too traditional in some parts. However, you know how people they respect and are respected there. It's something to be how can I say? It's something
Ad-
to
you admire it?
be admired. Thank you. Yes.
Right. It's interesting. Here's another stereotype about Canada. A lot of people around the world think people in Canada speak French. The truth is a little bit different. Celine Dion is from Montreal, in the province of Quebec, one of 10 provinces. Canada's a huge country. In Quebec, they speak French. The rest of
Yep.
the country speaks English. As you can tell, I'm not speaking French. Nobody in my city that I've ever come across speaks French. They may have learned a little bit, but it's not their language. It's funny when I go to the US, they all want to talk to me in French. Like, where do you get the idea that people speak French up there? It's about 95% English. I don't know the numbers, but
Probably this.
and when I was in high school, it was mandatory to study French, and it used to bother me because there were other languages I wanted to study, but we had to speak French, study French, and we're also told that if you don't learn French, you'll never get a job. Well, the truth is, after high school, I never used French again, except to watch a French movie. So it's kind of interesting. Celine Dion, yes, her first language is French because she's from Quebec. We have here also teacher detective, yeah. Oh, where was it? Stacy said, I'm Korean who's not good at math, right? So
That
a
was the best
stereotype,
one yet.
right? A stereotype about Koreans or Japanese or Chinese is that they're all great at math. So Stacy, you're a bad Korean, like I'm a bad Canadian, and Pedro
Like
is a
I'm a
bad
bad
Brazilian.
Brazilian. Yes.
So this is an interesting question. So when I was a high school student, which is a long time ago, we could learn French, obviously English. We could learn French. We could also learn Spanish. My brother, for example, studied Spanish. Now, students have a lot more choices, particularly based on where they are. So, for example, in Vancouver, being on the West Coast, a lot of the population are from Asia. So if you're in high school, a lot of your classmates may have come from China, Korea, Japan, Vietnam, or Thailand. So you can study those languages in a class. If you're in the east of Canada, a lot of the immigrants come from French-speaking former colonies in Africa or the Arab world. So you can study Arabic. You can study Mediterranean languages, Italian, Portuguese, things like this. So students now have a lot more choice, which is great because Canada is a multicultural society and all your friends growing up are speaking different languages. So it's good to learn the languages of your friends and their families. But when I was young, we had basically two choices, and they weren't choices really. We have Mexico schools teach English. Yes. I believe this is Araceli, and she's also an English teacher in Mexico. Are you,
Nice.
is, but I think she's changed her name, Aranisi.
Hmm.
Anyway, I think, Pedro, now we're at 4 p.m. my time, which is the usual start time. So we should have some of our regular viewers joining us, including number one viewer, Chris Derboven, who's been watching my live stream for the last 4 years.
Look at that.
Thank you for joining us, Chris. So for those of you who are just joining us, Chris included, we just got a chance to get to know Pedro a little bit, and then we'll get into our topic. Yeah, this is great, Stacy. Javier Dolan is a French-speaking film director, and he's from Montreal, Quebec, which is the
Okay.
French-speaking part of Canada. but he's achieved some international recognition for his films. Great. So, Pedro, let's jump into our topic. As you and I discussed starting months ago, one of the questions that always pops up from our students are related to prepositions. Teacher,
Yes.
how do I learn prepositions? How do I use them? What do they do? Why are they so hard? So you and I have come up with a bunch of questions we're going to go through today and really examine prepositions. But before we get started, why don't you tell me, can you tell me about your experience with your students and what kind of questions they've asked you about prepositions? What have you observed being their big trouble?
Okay, interesting. All right. But before that, you said some students come asking us, Teacher, how do I learn prepositions? And I admit, sometimes us teachers, we think, at least Brazilian teachers, English teachers, we think, how do I teach prepositions?
Yeah,
So it's very funny because learning how to use prepositions for me was kind of in a natural way because I used to pay a lot of attention. So I didn't really pay attention to the grammar structure when I learned. So it was a challenge for me to teach at first. And what I noticed, well, what I have been noticing actually um, for these years that I've been teaching, is that we have some key prepositions that students feel quite some difficulty
right.
about them, you know? And I think one of the greatest examples that I can give would be the difference between at, in, and on. Of
Right.
course, we have some other key prepositions that we are going to be looking into. However, at, in, and on, it's incredible how many people have difficulties with these ones, especially when we're talking about place.
Yeah.
So I have seen, for example, teacher, what do I say? Can I say that I on the beach? Can I say that I'm at the beach? Do I say that I'm in the beach? Uh, what if I'm talking about a mall or the school? Am I at school? Am I in the school? Am I in the bus? At the bus? So, and especially in Portuguese, for example, for us Brazilians, of course that it's very normal for for non how can I say non-native speakers, right? Have this difficulty and have this habit to translate.
Right.
And when we translate, it can be a little bit tricky. But I can speak for Brazil and for Portuguese when I can say that it can be very tricky when you translate. Because
Yeah.
I was talking to Paul the other day, and I gave him some examples of what happens when people try to translate. Basically, at, in, and on for us Brazilians, in many situations are the same. We have one word for at, in, and on. So I imagine in other cultures and other languages, and that's when I start saying to my students, stop translating. It will mess with your head.
Yeah. It's I think a lot of students initially learn, especially adults, because they've already learned their first language and they learn English secondarily. So they learn it through a translation process. Their teacher may speak in, for example, Portuguese while explaining English. And as a beginner, especially an adult, you have to go through that process. However, as we've talked about it before, there's a certain point where you have to stop that process and abandon your first language. And from that point on, learn English in English.
Yes.
And I was even talking about this with some colleagues today. That means absorbing everything changing everything you absorb in English to English, for even to the point of switching your computer settings to English, your Google Drive interface to English, so that everything you see is in English constantly, especially if you're not in an English speaking country. and then looking up words in the dictionary, an English dictionary. So you're learning the English meaning. That has to happen at some point, but here's the mystery. When is that point? Teachers and schools don't necessarily shut you off at a certain point from the translation style of learning. It's up to you at a certain point to decide, okay, I'm pretty confident in using English, but I have all these little problems. Now I have to switch. I have to start learning in English. And then the process of being exposed to English and absorbing it starts to work, right? And you can pick up the patterns of prepositions by reading and listening. That doesn't happen when you're a beginner learning in translation. The translation just ends up confusing you.
Exactly.
Your language, Portuguese, has prepositions, correct? You do
Yes.
use prepositions. And let me see if I understand this, but you have different prepositions, and sometimes they are taught directly translated, but after a while that's not good enough, right? They don't really directly translate one-to-one anymore. Is that correct, as you explained it to me the other day?
Exactly this. But the problem is not really how the prepositions are explained, because, well, they can't be translated. It's very hard. It's very difficult. The problem is that the students, most of the time, they are so used to translating that they have difficulties with understanding fully in English.
Yeah. We have a question here from Lolly.
That's
Now,
a
Lolly,
very
we
interesting
are
one.
we are going to go through an explanation and a discussion of individual prepositions. Sort of, we're getting there, but I want to say, to prepare you, here's something that I firmly believe as an English teacher. We have two different prepositions here, under and underneath. And her question is, do they have the same meaning? The answer, in my opinion, is absolutely not. If two words exist, they have different meanings. I don't believe in synonyms. Synonyms are words that are similar or related in meaning, but they're not the same. Otherwise, through the history of language use, if they had the same meaning, one of them would be lost. That's evolution of language. If it's redundant, the word goes away. So the fact that we still have these two words means they express different things. They could be tiny differences, but they are differences. So the meaning will be different. Are they interchangeable? Oops.
I
Yes,
help you.
sometimes they can be, yeah, thank you, Pedro. Sometimes they can be interchangeable, but a slightly different emphasis or meaning. So we'll come back to these prepositions and talk about them. So please stay with us because we have a list of the most troubling prepositions coming up. Let me just say hello to a couple people before we go ahead, Pedro.
Okay. Caroline
Yes,
is. Sorry,
interference is
sorry.
what we were just talking about, right? The patterns and structures of your first language get in the way. They interfere with learning the new language. That's a natural part of the process. And that's the point we were talking about with abandoning your first language at a certain point. Stop using it, stop thinking it, and start learning English in English. And that's how you get away from the interference. But it is a natural part of the learning process. Okay, so we have another question here from Stacy about in and on. We are going to talk about this specifically. So please stay with us, Stacy. We're going to get to these. Let's start with a definition. Okay, let's start with a very clear, let's understand, first of all, what the hell we're talking about here. So let me just clear the chat. Why can't I? Where is Stacy's comment? One moment here, guys.
Caroline
Here
said
we go.
she's sleepy because it's 2 in the morning. Thanks for joining us, Caroline.
Yeah, thank you. So the question is, let's start with this. What are prepositions, Pedro? What do you share with your students? How do you explain this question?
Well, basically, prepositions. I, to be completely honest, I never work with the meaning of the preposition to students because sometimes they find it confusing, but I will try to explain in a clear way for you guys. Basically, the prepositions, they are words that will kind of explain the relation between two other words. So this relation can be a relation about time. This relation can be place. We have many types of relation, right? When I talk about place, I can talk about position, right? So basically, it's a word that will establish a relation between two other words, and they will always connect, right? A noun and sometimes a verb.
That's good. That's a really good way of thinking about prepositions. I would add a couple of details too. I would say, as you mentioned, prepositions are connectors. First of all, that's what they do. They connect.
Hmm.
What I like what you said there about relationships. They connect relationships. They connect words to show a relationship. And they always connect nouns. That is their job. They connect nouns to other words. Now, the words they can connect to are verbs, adjectives, other nouns, etc. But their core function is that they connect nouns. And if you look at the word preposition, you can see a little clue here. Position and pre. Position is referring to the noun position. Pre refers to before. So they always go before a noun. And if you think about, let's say, the origin of human communication, I like to do this little thought experiment. Let's say, Pedro, you and I are cavemen.
Okay.
We're ancient humans, and we're just starting to use language. And we live in a cave, and we don't have clothes, we don't have cameras, we have nothing, right? We have food, and maybe we have some basic sticks and bones to make as tools. So we're starting to use objects. And in our cave, we start to accumulate objects, like you have a stick, I have a rock, and we use your stick and my rock to smash coconuts open to eat, right? Or maybe the head of a deer or something so we can eat. Well, now we have two nouns that we have to name. Your stick, my rock. Do I have a stick and a rock here? I wonder.
I would be surprised if you had.
I have a rock.
I would be really surprised if you had.
I have a rock, but do I have a stick? Let me see. I must have a stick. There's always a stick. Okay, we don't have a stick, but I have this kind of piece of wood thing, this bamboo.
Okay.
So Pedro has a stick he found in the forest and he made into a hammering tool, and we have a rock. So we're just learning to communicate. We're ancient human beings. And we start to name objects, right? Stick, rock. Pedro, this is stick. This is rock.
Okay. Rock.
Stick.
Stick.
And now we have two words. We say rock, stick, stick, rock. And you go, I don't understand you, Paul. So what? Rock, stick, big deal. We have to start being able to communicate more precisely ideas. And if you have two objects in three-dimensional space, you want to know about their relationship in space. Because we're living in three-dimensional space. We're living in a cave. You're on the other side of the cave. I'm over here. You have a stick, I have a rock. What's the relationship? We have to connect them. Because if you say, stick, rock, maybe I say, stick, rock. And you say, stick, rock. Well, they all look different, those spaces, but the words don't change. So we started using connector words to establish the relationship between the rock and the stick. For example, I'm not saying this is how prepositions started. Who knows? But it's a thought experiment. It's a thought experiment to understand how they operate. Go back
It's a
to
great
we,
logic.
right. We go back to the beginning of language. Okay, stick rock. How is that different than stick rock? Well, how about stick on rock? Oh, good. Right? How about stick under rock? Oh, I get it. How about stick near rock? Understand. How about stick above rock? Good. In? No, no in. I can't get in, right? And then Pedro creates a cup, right? He's a very innovative guy, very creative. He makes a cup. We can drink water out of it, right? And he doesn't know where to put a stick when he's not using it, so he says stick, cup. Stick, cup. No, how about stick in cup? Understand. So if you think about the origins of language, you can start to see the need for certain kinds of words and why they exist in the first place. Well, they exist to show those relationships. And as language grows more complex, we start to learn that we as humans can express something more than just space, because we start to learn to think abstractly. We start to think about this weird thing called time. How do we connect nouns in time? Because nouns can be objects like a rock, but they can also be ideas like love, happiness, survival. Those are abstract ideas, but they're nouns. So how do we connect those in time, right? Like you might be single, but in the future you want love. Well, how do you connect that? You start needing other kind of prepositions to connect nouns, right, with a preposition to verbs, adjectives, adverbs, other nouns, as we've seen. But that is what a preposition is. It connects to other words, but at the same time, it's grammatically connecting to these words. It connects relationships. So that's really important to understand, is that prepositions connect nouns to the rest of the sentence, and they establish relationships spatially, in time. And here's the other trick. As humans also evolved complex language, we start trying to be able to communicate these abstract ideas, okay? Abstract ideas that aren't physical, like a rock or a stick. But they need to be communicated as nouns. And what happens, definitely in English, but I'm sure in all languages, is humans start to use metaphor. So metaphor is when you make a similarity of two things that are not similar. You might say, Pedro is a ferocious fighter. He's a ferocious boxer. He's so ferocious, he is like a tiger. So then we say, Pedro is a tiger when he boxes. I'm not saying you box, but that's use of metaphor. And what happens in English is that oftentimes we take an abstract thing and use a physical noun connector, a preposition that usually connects a physical noun like on the rock or on the table, to connect an abstract noun. I'll give you an example. Trouble. Trouble is not physical. Trouble is an idea. So how do we, when we have trouble in our life, how do we make that connection? Well, because trouble is a noun. So how do we connect it to the rest of the sentence? Well, one of the words we use is in. Oh, I'm in trouble. She's in trouble. Mom is coming home soon and she's going to be angry. You're in trouble. Why? Because trouble is like a container. And when you're in it, it surrounds you and you cannot escape. Like I'm in my room and it's got walls and ceiling and floor. It's all around me. So when you have a trouble in your life, it feels like it is like being in a box of trouble.
Yes,
So you use the preposition in to attach the noun trouble, even though it is an abstract noun. And you can't really be in it physically because it's not a physical noun. So this is another problem with prepositions, is that we use them to connect nouns, but not all nouns are physical objects. Some of the nouns in English are abstract ideas and non-physical nouns, but they still
and
need
those
prepositions.
and those are very hard to deal with, Paul. Especially, for
Absolutely.
example, um, I think it was let me go back a little. I think it was Lolly. Uh, Someone said about the example of on the chat box or in the chat box. Well, we
Stacy,
can
yeah,
bring Stacy. Thank you. That's the perfect example, because when we talk about social media, for example, it's something virtual. It's not physical. You can't touch,
that's right.
right? You can't touch the digital. For example, Instagram. Am I in Instagram? Am I on Instagram? Is it in the
That's
chat
right.
box? On the chat box. It's not physical. I can feel it. I can't feel it.
That's right.
It's not around me.
So
And
that
that can
points to
be really
something,
challenging.
yeah. And again, it's that same process as humans went from cavemen to abstract thinkers. You have to connect the preposition to a noun still. In our lifetime, certainly in my lifetime, we've entered the digital age and all this technology appeared, and we have all these new nouns like mouse and interface and platform and website. And these are all nouns, but we have to use a preposition to connect it. So which one? Well, what's the relationship we have with internet? Well, it might feel like we're in it, but all we are is a person in a room and a flat screen. So everything that I see is on a screen, a flat surface, just like I'm on the flat surface of the floor. So the preposition on became applied to almost everything on the internet, because it's a screen you're looking at. Even if it feels like you're inside it, you're not in it at all. You are looking at everything on a surface. However, within that space, there are other things, such as a chat box.
Mm.
We call it a chat box because it's rectangular or square. It has borders, right? You put your chat in that because there's a box. So it's a little bit like a container, like this. Or do I have a box? I must have a box, right? Here's a box. A box has walls like a room does. It has a floor in a sense. It has a little ceiling. And whatever you see there is now in it. And that's a metaphor. It's the chat is like a box. So that's why we choose that you're making a comment in the box, but it's on the platform. And again, we'll talk more about these in detail in a few minutes, but let's go through our questions here, Pedro. Yeah, yeah, on the internet, because the internet is what? It's a network of digital information. However, my experience of the internet is me looking at a screen. And screen is a flat surface, and in English, flat surfaces, things are on them. So we'll get to that in a moment, but it is on the internet.
Hmm.
Okay, the other question I want to ask, now we know what they do, which is they connect nouns to other words, all the other words, and they come before the noun position, the preposition.
We have a great question there, Paul.
Okay.
Lolly, lolly. Listen to news. On? or in the radio? That's a
On
very
the
good
radio.
one
Yeah,
because and it's very interesting. For example, some people might confuse. Now, I am, let's say that I'm in my headphone, right? So if I'm listening to the radio here, am I listening the news in my headphone or on my headphone? So
right.
people can relate sounds, right,
That's right.
to environment, and that's also a great question. But like Paul said, I don't know about when I'm in my headphones, for example. Maybe I can say that I'm listening to something in my headphones, and that would be fine,
Yeah,
right? But
yeah.
when we talk about something that is external, I'm not immersed in that, then on.
Absolutely. And if you're listening to music and you use the preposition in the radio, that means the music is confined because in means there's confinement, there's container. I'm in this room, there's walls around me. Right now, I can't go through the walls. I need a door. These pens aren't going anywhere, they're in the cup. And the music is not inside the radio, it's not contained by the radio. How do I know that? I hear it. The music travels from the radio to my ears. How? It rides audio waves through the air, just like a surfer on the ocean, right? A surfer is riding water waves because they're on that surface. And a wave, if you think about a wave, like the audio waves, we know they exist because we measure them and they look like that, right? We use audio devices to measure, but they can be different heights.
Yes,
And the sound, it's metaphorical. We think of the sound as being carried on these waves, sort of like a little surfer, right? The sound is on those waves. It's definitely not inside the radio. It doesn't stay inside the radio. It travels out. So now is that understanding, is that logic useful? Maybe. Maybe it's just okay to say, I'm just going to memorize on the radio. Or when you're learning, pay attention to what you hear, pay attention to what you read, and you will notice that with the noun radio, it's always on, right? It's always used with on. So the question that I was going to ask next is, what's the best way to learn them? Well, you can listen to Pedro and I discuss them. You can study charts and memorize them. But as Pedro said earlier, sometimes you just have to pay attention to the English you're absorbing and notice the
exactly.
patterns.
And that's
Because grammar isn't just a bunch of rules. In fact, it's less a bunch of rules. And more of what grammar really is a description of patterns and structures. And if you pay attention to them, you can see the pattern and follow it.
and adding to what Paul said, the experience sometimes, and now talking as a non-native speaker, okay, as an English learner, for us sometimes it can be very tricky, and the rules can be very confusing. So most of the times we think we understood, but we didn't actually because we are not exactly sure on how to use them. Now, that's when you have to, for example, when you see it in a book or when you read it in a book, sorry, when you watch it in a movie, you see how it works. And when you see it, uh, it is better, it feels better because after that point, you can start to understand. So the experience is the best way to learn something, you know? It's, and the greatest example is that, let's see, like Paul said before, on and in, it can be used in different situations, but when we are confused, we need to experience, right? These on how to use them. We need to see. Most students are visuals, actually, and
Yeah.
I think Paul would agree with me, especially basic students or intermediate students. And I myself am very visual. I need to see how things work. Sometimes if you just explain things to me, I might get confused and forget something, right? So this immersion is very important when learning, especially when we talk about prepositions.
I would agree 100%. And this goes back to something I say 100 times a day, which is if you want to learn English, you really have to read. Some languages you can learn and you don't need to read. But English is so irregular and has all these little patterns that don't follow rules. You have to see it. You have to see it visually and notice the patterns. And that's generally how native speakers learn prepositions and articles, for example. We are forced to read a lot when we're kids, a lot. And we pick up those patterns and learn which prepositions tend to go with which nouns. Or another way I've seen people learn prepositions is by memorizing phrasal verbs, which are a verb and a preposition, like turn on the lights. But again, the word that comes after turn on is a noun. So it's okay to memorize phrasal verbs like turn on, or the pattern of collocations with an adjective such as I'm happy about, right? So that tends to go with happy. What are you happy about today? Well, I'm happy about. That's okay to learn that. But what I don't like about that method of teaching is that it ignores a very fundamental truth, is which is what's the word that comes after it? It has to be a noun. You turn on lights or stereos or cameras. You have to be happy about something. I'm happy about my birthday. I'm happy about the show. Nouns. So again, the pattern is always that there's a noun after the preposition. So if you learn by collocations, that's fine. But it's not a complete picture of what's happening in the sentence. And I think that can be a problem when students are learning these things. Right? So again, it comes down to reading, because this is just two words. Nobody walks around the street going, turn on, turn on. I know a phrasal verb, turn on. We use this in a sentence. And to
Yes.
see how it works in a sentence, you've got to read it. Turn on
And
the lights.
if I might add something here,
Please.
Lolly said something exactly what I wanted to say. I am happy about learning English. We have to remember that. Paul, can you board this
Yeah.
sentence, please? I'm happy about learning English.
Here we go.
Now, some people might ask, and Paul will help me with that. But teacher, learning is a verb. Is it,
Right.
Paul, in this sentence?
No. No, it's not. ing is only a verb when it's used with the be verb, like I am standing or we are learning. If you don't have a be verb, it's a gerund, and a gerund operates as a noun, right? And if it's a noun,
Okay.
it can be the object of a sentence or it can be the subject. For example, I like learning, subject, verb, object. Or learning is fun. Learning is the subject. Well, usually nouns are subjects or objects. So this is confusing, but it's a gerund, so it qualifies. It follows our pattern, preposition plus noun, right? And then here you have an adjective. So the preposition is connecting the noun with the adjective, right? So
Okay.
that's a great example. And that's one of the things that makes it hard to learn, because a lot of students have the false belief that this is a verb, and it's simply not. It's a noun. It's a thing. It's the name of an activity, right? Think about the Olympics. What are your favorite sports? Swimming, skiing, a lot of them are
Skateboarding?
named. Yeah, sure, right? A lot of them have gerunds as names. Well, how can it be a name unless it's a noun? It's the name of an activity. So it still contains like a trace of the verb meaning. It's the name of an activity. It's the name of an action that happens. But it's the name. Swimming is no longer a verb. It's the name of that action. It's what we call that action, right? And names are nouns. So it still follows that pattern. And again, these are all patterns of connectivity. And simple grammar rules don't help in learning them. You've got to see them in action in the context, as well as listening. But the difference is, if you learn by listening, sometimes a native speaker might speak so quickly, the preposition or the article like a or the are so, they're jumped over that you can barely catch them. But when you read, you can take all the time you need to notice the words. So Chris Derboven, her original language is Dutch, and she speaks Belgian French, I believe.
You have great memory, Paul. I hope I have it one day.
I remember names, and Chris has been watching the show since 4 years ago when I started, so she's our most dedicated fan and viewer. So I remember, and I've met her on Zoom, so, yes, Dutch. Dutch. So there are challenges when we're learning these prepositions and teaching them too. Like, teaching a student the pattern is just one piece of the puzzle. So let's go to the other piece, which is, the meaning. Where are we here? How do we decide which preposition to use? So in your experience, how do students understand this? And what do you tell them when they ask you this kind of question? Or if you haven't heard this question, what would you tell them?
Yeah, well, actually, this is a quite common question. And I always tell my students, and I give examples with different contexts. So basically, it all comes down to like context. It's like when do you use you in the singular and you in the plural? It depends on the context.
Right.
So I often give different situations to my students, right? Because it helps them understand better, right?
It's a good thought, because we need language represents something in reality, even if it's abstract reality, right? Like, in my future, I want to find love. That's an abstract idea, but it is a reality in our minds. So that answers, I think, a question we had here. I'll get to in a moment, Guy's question. But, what is language? It's there to describe, interpret, or explain reality, our lives, right? So to really learn a language, you need to see a context or use it in a context, so that you're talking about something real that the other person also shares, right? For example, you and I can see the whiteboard. We're sharing that experience, so we have a shared context. We can see the viewer comments. So we're sharing that context, and whatever we're talking about right now is a shared context. And that is what's lying inside our communications, right? Communication isn't just a bunch of words on a text in a textbook on a page, right? So at some point, we need to experience these patterns in a context. So Guy has a question here. We'll get to in a minute.
A hidden example, but a great one.
Yeah. So our thoughts in our head. Yes, because the head is literally a container. A head is a skull. I mean, do I have a skull here? I think I do, somewhere.
Oh God, Paul, you would impress me even more if you had one. You
I have one
impressed me with
somewhere.
the rock.
A head, the skull is just an empty container, and the brain is in it. Physically. Like, this isn't abstract anymore. This is biology. It's physically in your head. So the brain produces thoughts and ideas. They're not out here in my hand until I type or write something. The thought originates in your brain. The brain is also a container. It contains cells. It contains connections that produce ideas. So all of that is in your head, Guy. Absolutely.
However,
Why isn't it
if
on
your
your head?
thoughts,
Because
however,
this is what on your head means.
if your thoughts are outside your head, if you're gonna listen to your thoughts outside your head, you should be worried.
Different relationship, right? But if we said, are my thoughts on my head? No, my hat is on my head. It's above it, and my head is stopping the hat from responding to gravity, right? So just like the rock stops this from following gravity, if I take the rock away, this is going to come down. So on is related to that relationship of gravity. Just like my hat is on my head, but if I take my head away, that thing's going down to the floor. Now it's on the floor, and the floor stops it from following gravity's pull. I'm on the second floor of my building. So if I don't have a floor, it's going down to my neighbor. And I don't want my neighbor to have my hat. So let me get clear this up again. And we're going to, what I'd like to do now, Pedro, is look at the individual prepositions that give us the most trouble. Because this question for me is related to several things. How do we, and this is ultimately what language is about. Once you get to a, let's say, intermediate level, it is no longer about which grammar is correct. Is it this or is it this? At a certain point, you're not passing quizzes anymore. You are using language to communicate your ideas. When you're a beginner, yes, right answer, wrong answer, correct sentence, incorrect sentence, because you're trying to learn something. Teacher's trying to see what you've learned. You need to be tested. But language isn't for tests, it's for communication. As you get more skilled in your language, it's not about right or wrong or is this one the one I use. Now it's about choices. And, right here are three prepositions, probably the most common. And when you use a preposition with a noun or anything else, you have to make a choice. So how do we choose? It's no longer a grammar rule of this is right and this is wrong. For example, where am I here? Yeah, here's a pen. Here's a box. Actually, let me use this. Here's a little book, and here's a box. I can say the book is now in the box. It's contained and surrounded by the box. That's a correct answer. The book is in the box. But it's also correct to say the book is now on the box. So if someone says, teacher, which is correct? On the book on the box or book in the box? I'm going to say both. So how do you decide which one to use? It's about the meaning. As we said from the beginning, prepositions are communicating and expressing a relationship. What is the relationship between this object, noun, and this noun? It can be on, it can also be under, it can also be near, it can also be above, right? And of course, it can be in, because the box has the ability to contain things. So when I teach students how to use prepositions, I teach them where they go structurally. They go before nouns and after other words, verbs, adjectives. Okay, but how do you decide which one to use? Well, you have to start learning the meaning of them. Okay, so let's talk about that, Pedro. Let's look at the individual prepositions and make a little note of how we can use them. So let's start with in.
Perfect.
So what can in communicate, do you think?
Well, in is basically, almost always talking about inside, right? It is
Right.
contained inside borders, right? Limitations
Good.
in a
Borders,
container.
limitations. And again, these can be physical like the box, right? Or the cup or the room. They can be physical
Yeah.
containers and borders. Like
Or we can
I'm
say in
in,
the park.
yeah, I'm in Canada. Canada is a bunch of land. It's just a big rock, but it has borders defined by international law, and we are bordering the USA. If you look at the border of Canada and USA from the sky, there are parts that are just forest. There is no physical border. The border is a legal definition. So, and also we've said that these borders, limitations, and containments can be metaphorical. They can be non-physical, right? They can describe something that's conceptual, like trouble, right? Trouble. In trouble. Trouble is an abstract noun. It's just an idea. Or love. When you meet someone and you're very passionate about them, you are in love. Why? Because it feels like you are surrounded by it. Everywhere you go, there's love. You feel love. You feel it above you. You feel it below you. You feel you're surrounded by the feeling of love. Actually, it's in here, but it feels like you're in a container of love. You're in a big bathtub full of love. Right? So these ideas of borders and limitations can be metaphorical or physical. Anything else we should say about in?
Well, we can also say that it's not so different, but there's a difference between using in as a place, position, and time, right?
Right.
Time can be a
Absolutely.
little different, but not so much if we stop
Yeah.
and analyze.
It's time is not physical. It's an abstract idea that humans use to describe something that's happening in the universe that's very hard to understand. So time, to understand time and to talk about it, humans have created a lot of metaphors. Sometimes you hear things like, time is like a journey. Well, a journey is physical, right? You start someplace and you travel to somewhere else on foot or in a car. So time can be like that. Or time feels like a box because it has limitations. I was born in 1965. Someday I'm going to die. I'm limited. My lifetime is limited. So the time of my life, I feel like I'm in it. I'm in my middle age. I'm 58. You're much younger than I am. You're in your young adulthood. It's a period of time, and it has limitations. At some point, my middle age will be over, and at some point in the past, it started. So my particular age has a time limit. It feels like I'm in a box. And by the way, with time come other limitations, including physical ones. I can't play sports the way I did when I was young. But time itself is abstract. We can't touch it. We use clocks to make it physical, but the
Hmm.
clock is physical, not time. So, but yet, time is a noun. So we have to use prepositions with nouns. So we need to decide which prepositions to use. So we use the preposition we use for similar things,
Yes.
right? That's why it sounds mysterious to people. That's why it defies logic sometimes. I think most people can understand that the pens are in the cup or the little book is in the box. Okay, I get that, teacher, but what about time? What about in trouble? Well, those are metaphorical uses, and those are harder to grasp and learn. I also think they're harder to learn because a lot of teachers have a hard time teaching those things or ignore them altogether because the abstract noun is out of sight. It's out of view, right? But abstract ideas are still nouns, so they have to attach to some preposition.
but we can try to make a little simpler for them to understand better
Yeah,
and not struggle a lot. I would say, and then, well, I'll try to say something, and then
yeah,
you will complement if you find necessary. So let's try to make it a little simple. In, like Paul said and wrote on the board, we put containers, right? And limitations. What are limitations? It can be a country. For example, I live in Brazil. It can be a state. I live in São Paulo, and it can be my room. I live in a room. This doesn't mean that I will not use other prepositions like on
that's
and
right.
at in other contexts,
Yeah,
but in this case, I'm specifying that I'm in this place, right? That I'm in. I'm not out. I'm not on. I'm in. I'm
that's right.
surrounded by limitations,
Yeah,
right? I can, and that's the physical one. That would be the preposition of place in. Okay,
yeah,
so I can be in a park.
yeah. And a park has borders, physical borders. In my city, for example, downtown Vancouver is basically an island, and it has a huge urban park called Stanley Park. And it has physical borders. It's surrounded by the ocean. It sticks out into the ocean. So if you keep walking, you're going to fall into the ocean at some point. So when you're in the park, you are bordered by the ocean. You are physically bordered when you're in a park. You raise a good point, though, Pedro, that presents another challenge for learning prepositions. Sometimes you can use several different prepositions with a certain noun. And when you do, like I said earlier, it's not about this one only or this one only. Sometimes you can use different ones, but they're going to communicate something differently. So what I'd like to go to next is the one that's often confused with this, which is on, right? So what can we say about on? How
And
do
then
we
we can
understand the meaning of on? And then we can compare and
compare
the
the
differences
time
and the
later.
similarities.
I will save. There is a question. Not there was a comment here. Not long ago. I've just seen it.
Lollies?
Ah, lollies. Yes, I'm on
Yeah,
time. I'm in time, but I'll get there.
yeah.
Now I'll start again for the place. I'm going to talk about time with in and on together, right? But let's
Okay.
start with place. With on.
So we had place up here too. We talk about place here.
Yeah,
If you're
excellent.
within the borders of a place or the physical limitations or the abstract limitations of a place. Okay? So here we also use it for place.
Now on, and Co will help me if there's anything to add, please. Now, when we stop to think about on, we need a surface.
Yeah,
Okay, we need a surface. For example, this is my cell phone. My cell phone is a surface. This is my bottle. That might not be a good idea, but the water bottle is closed, so it's okay. The bottle is on my cell phone. In this case, the surface is my cell phone, but the bottle can be on the wall if I
that's
put a
right.
shelf over there, right? And the
Yeah.
wall would be a surface.
This whiteboard is a surface, a flat
Exactly.
surface. So when I write on the whiteboard.
And Maria Cristina asked, is the same to say in the street or on the street? It's not the same, but you can say both.
That's right.
It depends.
Each one expresses something a little bit different. It expresses different relationships. For example, on the street just expresses that you are walking on the surface of the street, right? So, where is Paul walking? He's walking on the street, not on the sidewalk, right? In the street suggests that something is in the middle of the borders of the street. And maybe you use that to explain something is in the street that shouldn't be, right? Because you're emphasizing the borders of the street, the containment. Like there's a large crowd in the street. Yes, it's true, they're on the street at the same time, but you say in the street to show that they are contained by the street,
You're
right?
specifying.
Yeah. So place and specifically a surface. And again, like you just mentioned, sometimes both things are usable because they are both possible physically and in terms of language. I'll give you a funny example we had a couple weeks ago. Someone asked me about this question. Where is it? Maybe I don't have it. They asked me, teacher, which one's correct? On the beach or in the beach? Very common question. And I said, well, both are possible, but they're going to communicate different things. And I brought some pictures, which I think will illustrate in a comical way. So if we think of on the beach will be a surface, and Pedro is on the beach. Do you have a beach near you, Pedro, in your town?
Not in my town, but, well, some miles away, some kilometers away.
Okay. So
Next city.
So you know what it's like to be on the beach.
Oh, yes, I do.
His relationship to beach, which is a noun, is one of being on the surface. So that's possible. That's what that means.
Yeah.
If you say in the beach, what does that mean? Well, this is what it means. Sorry, Pedro, I cut you off. So this guy is definitely not on the beach anymore. Now he's in the beach. The beach is all around him. It's a container, right? Now, that's possible. We can see it in the photo. This guy is playing. You know, I think in the ancient times, this was a serious punishment. They would bury people up to the neck and let the animals eat at their head. But it's possible to be in the beach. It is physically possible to be in the beach. So it's not a question of which one is correct. They're both correct because the only thing that's correct or incorrect is, does the preposition connect to a noun? Yes, on the beach, in the beach, both are correct. The meaning is different. Here's another example. Teacher, in the bed or on the bed? Well, both are possible. In this photo, the children are on the surface of the bed. The parents are contained within the bed. They're in the bed because the covers are all around them. So in this case, the bed has a special property. The bed is the key, right? It's the noun. The bed has the ability to be a surface and the ability to be a container.
Yes.
So if you're describing the kids are on the bed. If you're describing the parents, they're in the bed. So it's not a question of correct yes or no. It's a question of choosing,
Context.
deciding which preposition, depending on the meaning. And by the way, while we're here, Pedro, we should talk about this one. Because the other question I get about, you probably get this too. Teacher, why do we say on the plane, on the bus, when I'm clearly in it? Let me explain that quite simply. Remember we said from the beginning that prepositions connect the noun and they express the relationship between the noun and other words. So if we say Pedro is on the beach, Pedro's a noun, beach is a noun, and we are communicating the relationship between Pedro noun and beach noun, just like we started with when we're cavemen. Stick, rock, stick on the rock, stick under the rock. When you're, let's say, on, do you ever use a skateboard, Pedro? Have you ever used a skateboard?
Well, I have
Surfing?
tried. I have tried. It didn't end well, but I have tried.
Okay. I've tried too. Terrible. Danger, problems. But when you're using a skateboard, we would say you're on the skateboard. Why? Because your relationship is one of you and a surface. So Pedro is on the floor of the skateboard. Would that relationship change if we put walls here? No. So if we turn the skateboard into a bus, we just put walls and a ceiling up. Yes, it is true that he's in the bus, but he's able to stand and walk on the surface of the bus floor. In fact, that's his main relationship. So when you use a bus, we say on the bus because your relationship is to the floor of the bus, not the walls or the ceiling. In fact, I don't know about you, Pedro, but when I'm on the bus, I never touch anything. A lot of
Hands
germs.
crossed.
Yeah, a lot of germs, a lot of greasy, sweaty germs in a bus. So I don't touch anything. My relationship is with the floor. I stand on the bus and I move on the bus. And that relationship doesn't change if we make it really long and put wings on it, right? If we turn it into an airplane, I don't touch the walls or the ceiling of an airplane. My relationship is with the floor of the airplane, and I can move along that floor. So we would say I'm on the plane. Yes, it physically is possible to say I'm in the plane, right? But that describes the relationship of the plane containing you. It's possible to say that, right? It is possible. But generally, we describe this relationship. And so that's true of all vehicles, except when you're in the car. What's the difference? Well,
You can't
in a
move.
car, you can't move. You don't have a relationship with the floor. You have a relationship with the seat, which confines you. It gives you borders and limits, right? So you're in the seat, you're in the chair. That's another point. People often talk about chairs. Teacher, why do we say in the chair when I'm clearly, my bum is on the chair, on that surface? I'm sure you've heard that question, Pedro. On the
Oh,
chair, why is
yes.
it in the chair?
But it's very interesting because here in Brazil, there is something that students are mostly taught incorrectly. They are taught on the chair. Some school
Right,
books have on the chair to explain
I see.
on. Can you believe it?
Yeah, I can. It's possible. But, that's why we have this show. That's why you and I are doing this, because we want to clarify these things.
Dismystify.
So we said on is for place, surfaces. To understand this one, I think we just have to think about history. Because although, let me put it this way, language is very old, right? And words are very old. And the word chair is very old. However, humans change their technology all the time, including chairs. Believe it or not, chair is technology. It's something that humans make. And if you look at old chairs, they didn't look like a modern chair. Old chairs were like a big wooden box. They had huge armrests, right? They look more like, maybe I'm not a great artist here, but they look more like this. If you think about, well, you watch mythology shows like Vikings and stuff, I'm sure you see this. The chair is like a big box with these big armrests, and it's clearly confining you like a box. And so, in those old times with those old chairs, what preposition did they choose? Well, they chose in. So the language didn't change, the chair did. So even though modern chairs are very simple in their design, and a lot of them, especially like school chairs, don't have armrests. So yes, it looks like you're on the chair, but we're still using the language from an earlier time when a chair was clearly a box. So that's another reason why language can be confusing, Pedro, I think, is that language changes very slowly.
Yeah,
Technology, including chairs, changes rapidly. And we have to, it takes time to catch up. Maybe in the future, we will
maybe.
start using the word on the chair. It does make more sense with modern chairs. Is there anything else we can say about on?
Of course. When it comes to time.
Yes.
Now, on, let's imagine that on is a point in time, is a like a specific point in time that it's inside in. What do you mean? Now, for example, we are now in October. It's a long period, but we are on the 20th
Right.
of October. And then there's another example, and again, Paul, I wish I could have the same memory that you do, but someone said here, is it in time or on time, or it was just a comment? In time and on time.
Yeah,
Now, it was Lolly. Thank you.
yeah,
Now, there's a difference because, again, in is inside a space of time,
right.
you know? So, for example, if I say I am in time, it means that, for example, now it's 9 p.m. and the live, 9 p.m., sorry, in my time, and the live is supposed to be to end later. Now, if you arrive now, you can still see the live and you can still watch the live and you are in time because it
Yeah.
didn't finish.
So the
But
limit of the time.
perfect. But if you said, for example, the live started, okay, at 7:30 my time, and I was here 7:30, so I was on time, right? So on is specific. I'm on the time that I needed to be.
Right.
I'm on time and in time.
Yeah. Those are great. Those are great explanations, Pedro. And I would also offer that, why do we use it this way? Again, what we said about time originally was that it's an abstract concept for humans. So to understand them and put them into language, we need to use metaphor. And for example, a lot of our understanding of time becomes visual metaphors, right? Like a clock is a visual, physical representation of the idea of time. But the clock itself is not time. And the same is true of measurements of time. We think visually in terms of a clock or a calendar, right? You think of a calendar. I guess you can't see this. I'll make it over here. You think of a calendar, it's just something someone drew someday. Someone came along and said, how can I think about a measurement of time we think of as a month or a year? Let's make a calendar. And a calendar is more physical. It can be an object, it can be a drawing or a graph, and we can represent a month in terms of a physical object now, a drawing, but if it's on paper, it's physical. It's certainly more graspable than the abstract idea of time. It's a visual thing. But look, it has limitations. It has a starting point, right? The first day, and it has an ending point, and we can divide these up, right, into a month. This is not going to be mathematically accurate, so be nice. So now we can see that the month is a box, just a drawing, but it's more physical than the abstract idea of time. Now it's a box, and the box contains a variety of days. So when we talk about months, October, for example, we are in the month of October somewhere in this container, this box, right? Well, which day is today? Today, I think, is the 20th,
The 20th.
right? So now we have to describe that. So now we are going to say, let's say we are in October, and now we have to have another connector to describe our relationship to that date. And all of this is abstract. It's all metaphor. But we have to make a decision. We have to use a preposition with the 20th, which is the noun. So we're going to say, on that. Now, if we expand the 20th, maybe I can do this here, and make another box. Sorry, Pedro, I'm just going to take you off screen for a moment.
Okay.
So if we look at the one day, the 20th, now that's another box because we know in our abstract thinking that a day lasts 24 hours, and during that 24 hours, other stuff happens, which means that day can contain smaller units of time, such as hours, right? So the 20th becomes a different box. So this is a box inside another box. So we're in October, we're on the 20th. What happens in the 20th? Well, other units of time, such as the show starting, the show ending. That's another limit. So one thing to remember about prepositions is they're connecting nouns, but these nouns have relationships. And when it comes to time, or basically anything measurable, you're talking about concentric. I don't know what the geometrical term is for squares, but this square is inside this, and then inside here you have 24 squares called hours. And I don't know how many minutes are inside those hours, 60 times 24, whatever that is. So these are boxes inside other boxes. That's not real. That's all abstract ways of describing time. So we're using the visual representation of a calendar to think about time. But in order to do that, we have to think about a box, inside another box, inside increasingly smaller units of time. So in a way, Pedro, we alternate between in, at, on, at, and in. Like they keep repeating inside each other.
Exactly.
Now that can be very confusing because we don't see that necessarily. It's not so physical like stick on rock because it's a metaphor. It's a metaphorical way of understanding an abstract noun. Month. Show me a month out there in the world. Month is not physical. Day isn't physical. Hour isn't physical. None of that is physical. It's all abstract thinking. But we represent it with things like calendars and nouns like months, days. These are all abstract metaphors, but they're nouns. So they need prepositions, right? And I think that's lost in a lot of education for a very simple reason. It's hard to understand. It's hard to explain. I'm sure there are people watching this who didn't understand a word I just said, right? Who don't know what an abstract idea is yet. They haven't learned that in English, if they've learned it in their own language. But this is where the language gets really complex and confusing because it doesn't seem to follow the physical patterns that we can see in the world, right? Let's see something here. Speaking of in, on, and at, about time, I do have a graphic here that some of you may have seen on the internet. I did not create this. Let me just get rid of the caption. Lolly's question. I'm sure you've seen this graphic, Pedro. I think we need to move to our left a little bit here. But if you look on the internet, in, on, at, you might see this graphic somebody made. It appears in textbooks. People make their own versions of it. But it's one way to help you learn how to use in, on, at for time and place. But I think we talked about this earlier. If you look at the place category, can you point to that, Pedro, on your side? Right? It talks about countries, cities, and neighborhoods. Yeah. But that's not the only kind of places that it can describe, right? And it's not the only way to use in, like we talked about boxes and cups that also use in. So this is not a complete comprehensive graphic, but it can help you just sort of separate, especially with the time, it can help you separate in, on, and at. But look at the triangle shape, because that's significant to me. If we think of the triangle as representing general to specific, that can help you make these decisions, right? The most general time to the most specific. And like I said, you also have to remember that we move from general to specific, like in my calendar. We move from general to specific, But then inside specific, there's general and specific again. So the triangle idea is helpful, but once we get to specific, for example, hours, hours can also be considered general because inside hours are minutes and seconds and microseconds, which are more specific. So there's a lot to this stuff. But this can be found on the internet. It's widely available. I suggest everyone get a copy and print it and keep it in their notebook. It's very useful. Have you seen this graphic or something like it, Pedro?
Oh yes, I have, and it's very useful. Again, it's not um, everything that we need to know, but it does help you, and this will lead us to at, right?
Yes. At. Let me pull down at. Our friend at.
That,
What
as
can we
Paul
say about
said,
at?
is the most specific of them all, right? So, well, when we talk about at in place, we're talking about a specific point in, as Poe said, and I love his explanation, in town, for example, right? But is it can at the same time it's not as specific as in when we talk about place, right, Paul? For
Yeah.
example, I can be at the park. Now let's imagine that Paul calls me. Okay, Pedro,
Hey, Pedro, where are you?
I'm at the park.
Okay, I'll meet you there.
Paul's in
I
the
get to the
now.
park.
He's at the park. He calls me again.
Where are you, man? I can't see you.
Oh, Paul, I'm
I'm at the
in the
park.
park.
Oh, you're in the
I'm
park.
I'm in the park.
Okay, I'll
See?
meet you in the park. And I walk in the middle of the park.
And
Pedro, where are you?
so and then I can say I'm next to the statue, or
Yep,
maybe I can say, well, I'm at the lake.
exactly. So now there's a more specific location in the
And
middle of the
again,
park at the lake. So it's like a circle inside a circle inside a circle. In other words, everywhere you go becomes more specific. It also becomes more general depending on what you're looking at, especially when you're talking about a city. So, for example, if I come to Brazil and my plane lands and I phone you, hey, where are you? And you say, well, Paul, where are you? You're asking me where in the world I am. Oh, I'm in Brazil now. Okay, that's more specific than the world. But now you're going to say, okay, Paul, you're in Brazil. Great, so am I. Brazil's a big place. Where are you more specifically? Oh, I'm at the airport. So the triangle gets more specific. I'm at the airport. Great. Pedro comes to the airport. Hey, I don't see you. There's a million people here. Oh, yeah. I'm in the International Arrivals Building. So Pedro walks over to the International Arrivals Building. Hey, Paul, I don't see you. Where are you? Oh, I'm over here at the customs desk. Pedro goes to the customs desk. Paul, I don't see you. I see a million people trying to go through customs. Oh, I'm over here in lane number 6, right? Customs desks, there's 20 of them. I'm in aisle 6, right? So these are circles inside of circles. These are in and then at and then in again, and then it could be on, right? I'm on the second floor of the airport. So when we talk
correct?
about at, it's like the first step in determining where you are in the large space of the world, right? Now you and I both know right now that we're in two different countries. We're in countries. I'm in Canada, you're in Brazil. So
Correct.
let's go to the next layer. Where in Brazil are you? What's the
Well,
next thing
I'm
I would need to know?
in São Paulo, at my house, in
At
my
your
bedroom.
house. In your bedroom. So there's
No,
an
actually,
in inside
I'm
the at.
sorry. I made a mistake. In my rabbit's bedroom.
In your rabbit's bedroom. So
Yeah.
if you tell me I'm at my house, that doesn't help me a lot. It gets me from the airport to your house, but now I'm looking at this house. I could even walk in the house and still not see you because there are several rooms. I need to know which room you're in. So all of these prepositions are used to connect the noun that has a relationship with the rest of the idea, right? You're in your room, you're in Brazil, you're at home. These are all they're all interacting. Now that makes it confusing. I get that. But it's also important to understand that they work like this. They don't it's not just a matter of memorizing a rule. The rule won't help you much. These are patterns and relationships. Is there anything else we should say about at?
Oh, yes, because when it comes to time, it's a little easier, I would say. Because then, when it comes to time, we're talking about something more specific. So, as Paul said before, in a calendar, for example, we are in October on the 20th.
Right.
Now, for me, at 9:22 p.m. So,
Right.
when we use at, now we are inside the day, right? Like Paul mentioned and showed before, a little square, a little box. So it's more specific. At
Yeah.
9, at 8. So we mostly use at to talk about time, we mostly
Yeah.
use on to talk about days, and we mostly use in to talk about months, years,
That's right.
periods of time in time, you know?
And if you have that graphic again, you can get pretty far just by memorizing these things. Like you said, in the month, on the day, at a certain time. Like that, I'm not a big fan of memorizing when it comes to language, but it doesn't hurt to memorize these patterns because they are pretty consistent. I'm not going to
However,
say 100%.
there are some tricks. For
Yeah,
example, Paul, help me out, please. Morning. At morning or in the morning?
in the morning, because the morning is a
Afternoon.
limited time. In the
Afternoon.
afternoon.
Why do we say at night?
Good question.
So that it can be tricky
Yeah,
sometimes.
yeah, for sure. If we follow this idea that at is most specific of time or place, maybe we can say that night is a very specific feature of time because it involves darkness. So probably we think of daytime as a limit, but also our normal. We exist in the daytime. So humans look at daytime as the norm. That's when we're awake. So it contains us. If you think about ancient humans, you woke up when it was light and you went to sleep when it was dark. Nothing good could happen in the dark, let's say before electricity. So the daytime really contained you. Humans existed in the day. Night was something else. It was like a different world. So maybe if we think of the daytime as our container, night is like a specific location. The wolves are looking to eat us at night. It's a specific time, but we're contained by day. So again, the language is really old, right? And the
Well,
way we
we
live
can
now may not
specify.
match up.
Yes, but we can specify. We can say that things happen in the night.
Yes, because modern humans do a lot of things in the nighttime. We're not limited by day anymore. We have electricity. We have vehicles to travel around at night. But if you think about when language started, humans were very limited. They couldn't do anything at night. It was dangerous. Pedro, if we left our cave in the old days, at night, we're dead. That's
Quite
when the
probably.
wolves came out. We are getting close to our time limit, Pedro, and I want to come back to a couple of quick look at a couple of other prepositions. But in, on, at are the most commonly used because I think you can see here, we're describing things that we interact with every day: time, places, surfaces. If you think about surfaces, humans have a close relationship with surfaces of all kinds constantly. I'm on the floor. We are walking on the street. We're walking on the sidewalk. We are looking at material on the internet. So these ideas are probably the most common prepositions. But there are a lot of prepositions. And in fact, I have a document here that I've made that kind of lists all the different kinds of prepositions that are possible. If you want a copy of that, folks, I'm just going to put my email address here. Get in touch with me, and I'll send you a copy of that list of prepositions. Again, I don't necessarily think it's helpful to memorize prepositions, but it doesn't hurt to do a little bit of study, or at least have a reference, so that when you're reading it or writing or speaking English, you can check and see if it's working correctly. So send me a request to my email address, hardboiledenglish6@gmail.com, and I'll get you a copy of that. Pedro, let's quickly have a look at some of the questions we have,
Sure.
which I think we can, now that we've discussed this, I think we can go through a lot of them quickly. We have in
There's
love,
one.
again, love is a container. Chris mentioned, is it the same to say in the street, I think was the,
Yeah,
yes, in
it's
the street or
next
on the
one.
street. So both are possible, Chris. Depends what you're connecting to, right? Is the cars move on the street, that's true. It's also true that their cars are in the street because they're limited. They don't usually drive on the sidewalk, right? So let's say the street is a limit for cars. So we usually would say, I can see a Ferrari in the street, or there are too many cars in the street, because they are limited. With people, it's a little different because a person can walk on the sidewalk, on the street, and also be in the street. But then a human's not confined by the street, right? You can walk on the sidewalk, you can go into a building. Cars are limited. So typically with cars, you might hear in the street. Pedro, you talked about on time, in time.
Yeah, but there's one that Chris mentioned. Can you move in the plane? We must be in our chair.
Oh, yes. How do you get to the chair, Chris?
That's the point. So you can move.
Yeah,
You can
yeah,
stand up and walk and go to the
yeah,
restroom if you need.
yeah. So, yes, it's true that we are in our chair when we're on the plane, but it is also true. And again, that word is really important. Also, right? For beginners who want yes or no answers or correct or incorrect answers, it's hard to get to the point where you can start to realize that they're both true. They both are possible to use, or in the beach or on the beach. Now we can think about which one's more commonly used, but that's only helpful to a degree, right? I want my learners to be able to make all of these choices based on what they're trying to express. So in the chair is possible. On the plane is also possible to describe different ideas in the same scenario. Chris is taking a flight to Canada. What's true? Well, it's true that she's on the plane. It's also true that she's in her chair. To a degree, it's also true that she's inside the plane. She's certainly not outside the plane. You'd need a parachute for that. I don't think Chris parachutes. Maybe. What else do we have here? We have something about the hospital.
Yeah.
So I can answer this because my wife is a nurse. If I phone my wife right now and she's late to come home, I might say, honey, where are you? Oh, I'm still at the hospital, in relation to the rest of the city, because I don't know where she is. After the hour that she's normally finished work, I'm not sure where she is. She drives quite a distance to get home. So when I don't know where in the city she is, she'll say, oh, I'm at the hospital. There's a big emergency. If I want to know which building she's in, she could say I'm in the hospital building, right? If there's another building, if there's another alternative. So both are possible to say. It all depends. Now, I want to tell you something else about this. Often in English, if you say I'm in the hospital and you're not a nurse or a doctor, and it's unusual for you to be in that building, this expression means you're sick, right? My mother is in the hospital. Well, my mother isn't usually in the hospital. She's not a nurse or a doctor. She's retired. So if she's in the hospital, it means she's ill and getting treatment, and I'm worried. If my wife says I'm in the hospital, big deal. She's always in the hospital. She works there. Yeah, obviously you're in the hospital, right? So in English, this is often used to express the fact that someone's in hospital because they're ill, because they're not usually in that building, right? My wife is always in that building. So if she says I'm at the hospital, it means she's not home, or she's not at her activities or visiting her friend, or she's not at the restaurant or something. So it's telling me where in the city she is, right? So here's yeah, I'm in the hospital because I'm working at the moment. Again, that's possible. I'm in the hospital compared to another building. But if you work there, it's also true that you could just say I'm at work, right? I'm at work.
Very good.
Yeah. I want to say hello to a couple people that have joined us that I didn't say hello to earlier. We have Lesla or Lesla, I'm not sure. On LinkedIn, thank you for watching. Yeah, thank you, Lolly Lolly. We have in time, on time, yes. On the boat or in the boat. This is great. What do you think of that, Pedro? On the boat or in the boat? Which one's correct?
It depends on the boat.
Yes.
It
Yep.
depends on the boat that you are in. You can
And
be on the
also,
boat if it's a
that's
cruise,
right.
for
Yep.
example. You can be on a ship, but you can be in a kayak,
That's right. Think about
right?
that idea of surface, right? If you're on a cruise ship, your relationship to the ship is mostly surface. You're walking around a lot, right? I know I've never been on a cruise, but my sister has been on several, and they walk around a lot. So their relationship is with the floor, right? But like you said, if you're in a kayak or a small boat, you're really contained by it, and you're certainly not walking. So on a cruise ship, you're not limited so much. You're able to move, so you're not confined or contained, right? Container, limits. You're free to move. So we would say that you are on the boat or on the ship. But if you're in a boat where you can't move so freely, or a part of the boat, like a cruise ship, if you go down into your room, now you're contained. You're in your room. Or if you have a small boat like a fishing boat, you can go in it where there's like a little kitchen and a dining room or a bed to sleep in overnight. It depends on this idea. If you can walk around on it, most of the time we would say you're on that thing, right?
Yeah.
And even small boats have different parts, right? You have a surface that you can walk on, like a sailboat, right? If you have a big sail here, you can walk on the surface, but you can also go down below and you can sleep in the boat, right? So you have a surface and a container inside the boat. Depends on which part of it you're expressing, which relationship between you and the boat you're expressing. And like you said, Pedro, the size of the boat, kind of boat.
Yeah.
We have other prepositions to talk about, but I kind of feel like maybe, Pedro, we need another show.
Part two?
Yeah, I think so. Because I have to wrap up here and go to another meeting shortly.
Oh, I'm in.
Yeah.
I'm
So
in.
if our viewers don't mind, let's schedule another preposition episode in the future to talk about things like under, above, about. Now we
Four,
do have a
two,
question here earlier. Sorry, what did you say?
4, 2.
Yes, 4 and 2. Now I've actually talked about 4 and 2 a lot on this show, so our viewers can find other content on my YouTube channel with 4 and 2. But let's
Perfect.
definitely do that in a second episode. Now, before we go, I want to answer this one. Someone asked earlier about under and underneath.
Yeah.
That was quite early, right?
And I think,
Do you remember who said it?
let me check. I'll check.
It's kind of hard for me to see it from where I am.
Probably
Here we go. It was our friend Lolly.
Lolly, right?
Yeah. So Lolly's asking under, underneath. I told her earlier that I don't believe they express the same thing. This is what I would say about it. Under is the relationship of, let's say, the stick is under the rock. Okay? Or let's say something in your room, Pedro, that you have is under something.
Oh yeah, of course. I have my cell phone in the bottle again.
Okay, good.
So my
So
cell
under,
phone is under
yeah.
my
So
bottle.
under expresses this relationship of vertical, right?
Now, I can give you a better example.
Great.
I am under my rabbit.
Perfect. Now what I want to say about this is that we can see the rabbit and you, just like we can see the rock and the stick. So that's under. I would argue that underneath means that something is under. That's true because the word is right there, under. But this idea of neath implies that you cannot see it. It's hidden. So, for example, some people, I don't know anyone who does this, but apparently some people hide money underneath their bed, underneath the mattress, so nobody can see it. It's under there, yes. It's also hidden. Or they might hide something. For example, in my room, I have carpet, right? It's good for the sound. Underneath the carpet is a wooden floor. Now, I can't see the floor, but I know it's there because when I moved into this building, there was no carpet. So I can say there is a wooden floor underneath the carpet. So it's a vertical relationship, carpet, floor, but I can't see the floor. I just know it's there. It's hidden. So underneath, or another word, beneath, implies that it's hiding. So that's a subtle difference. You can see that the stem word is there, under. So there's a deep similarity, but this little part of the word here, neath, implies that it's invisible. It's hiding, right? So you can put something underneath something else, and then it's invisible. You can't see it. But Pedro, I think we have to wrap up before everything starts to melt here.
Okay.
So I first want to say thank you, Pedro, for joining the show today and sharing your insights and perspectives. So
Thank you
everyone
for
out there,
having me.
please thank Pedro for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.
And I also want to say thanks to all our viewers for joining the show today and engaging with comments and asking great questions and suggestions. Really appreciate it. Any final thoughts, Pedro, about prepositions or English?
That we need part 2.
Yes, it's a huge topic.
It is, I told you.
Yeah, it's a huge topic. I think we today laid a good groundwork, though. We talked about the definition of prepositions, what they do, and all that. We also started looking at 3 specific ones, really common ones. We looked at a lot of examples. So maybe the next time we do a preposition show, we can jump right into all the example
Yeah.
prepositions because we have the background.
Perfect.
So
I agree.
Thank you, Guy. I think Guy is in Argentina. So thank you. And Pedro, yes,
Thank you.
of course. Thank you, Pedro. Thank you, Guy, for joining us and watching. Thanks to Lolly for questions. Thank you for everyone who participated. Chris, Chris. We have Chris with us. Just a great pleasure to have you all with us. So I'll say good night from Canada, Pedro. I'm going to take you off screen now and say good night to everyone. So until the next time I see you, everyone, and Pedro, stay healthy, keep learning English. And as always, my final thoughts, Pedro, is always the same. I want you and everyone who watches the show to stay cool.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye, Pedro. Bye, everyone.
Bye.